or waterway, protected area. And a site that has slopes greater than 10%, a site that has highly erodible soils, and that's out of the soil conservation soil index that we determined the erodibility of the soil. And then any site that may have a history or a known contamination on it. So that might be underground leaking tank, contamination from various previous industrial activities, such as a logging site that might have high concentrations of pesticides or PCBs on the site. So any of those sensitive types of situations would require an erosion permit. So pro tip, visit your site before you start doing your erosion plan. Site visit is very important to both ground truth, the survey that you will have for the site, so you know what the site looks like, identify areas of concern or conservation areas to be protected, so you know those and ensure that they can be on your basement.
Thank you, Dow. We do have a hand raised. Paul?
Yeah, that's me. I didn't want to interrupt, or I didn't know if we were supposed to wait till you were finished, Dahl, to ask a question, but I had a student who actually has property, you know, they're wanting to build a house on some property in Portland. And there is a period of time during the year when they are not allowed to, and it's on a hillside condition. And they're not allowed to, you know, do any excavating on the site in the winter months. Do you encounter that a whole lot? Are there areas that you say, no, you will not be doing anything here when it's, you know, between, I don't know, October and April or something like that?
It's a good question. Our ordinance works a little bit differently. We don't prohibit work during that time. We identify October 15th through April 30th as the wet weather season. And during that, construction during that time period requires additional BMPs. So you have to account for the fact that it's going to be wet, you're going to have saturated soils, there's going to be runoff. What are you going to do in those conditions? And what measures and practices are you going to employ to ensure that you stay compliant with the ordinance, which is nothing but clean water runs off your site. So we can't, you know, tell people not to do it, but we can tell them they're going to have to work a lot harder to do it in those months. And then it's their choice. You know, they want to spend the money and the time to do that. They're able to go ahead.
Thank you, Paul. And that was a great question. And thank you, Dow, for telling us a little bit more about erosion prevention. Before we move on to Kara McKenzie, our permit intake technician, Dal, if I'm riding around the city of Eugene and I see something like some of the photos that you shared, is there a number or a contact that would be good for me to reach out to?
Yeah, there is. We have a erosion hotline, we call it. So that's both the complaint number, if someone sees something that they think needs to be investigated, or otherwise has a question about construction activity and whether they're being compliant with their project. And you can call that number at 541-682-8471.
Thank you, Dow. Okay, Kara.
All right, give me notes back up. Where it disappeared. All right. So hi, I've been working for the city of Eugene as a permit technician for going on about 6 years now. I'm a permit tech too. Our team is a team of 4, and we are the initial point of contact. We pretty much see every building permit. We do see every building permit that comes through. We do the initial check, see if it's in a sensitive area, does it need erosion? Is the project allowed in this zone? And kind of look at the bigger picture and make sure all the plans are needed for the plan reviewers to be able to do their jobs. Some of the stuff that I see people struggle with the most when submitting plans is probably site plans and also stormwater destinations seem to hold up this. But with the site plan, some of the stuff that we look for on there is we want to see the whole development sites. We need to know stormwater destination, location of utilities and the area of work where the work is taking place. It's important to have setbacks, any easements that are on the lot. When you are preparing to submit plans, I suggest that you kind of reach out to the local jurisdiction and see, ask them some questions. Every jurisdictions can be a little bit different. Some areas restrict amount of plumbing fixtures or have in the past. I know things are constantly changing with that. And that's why it's kind of a check in with your local teams like land use and public works. And for bigger projects such as commercial, we do have PC meetings. The PC meetings is prior to permit submittal, and everything gets done online. So you would submit it through our e-bill portal, and you would set up a time and a date. You'd pick the departments that you think you needed to talk to, and it's just a chance to get everybody together, get on the same page, and ask any important questions and get prepared for the permit submittal process. Like I was saying, it is all electronic now, so we go through e-builds. That is a city website. A lot of the other ones around here use the e-permitting system, but we created our own, and it's not too hard to use. There's a lot of different resources on our website. There's different videos of how-tos. Some of the other stuff that people get stuck on when they submit plans is all of our plans get submitted as individual PDFs. They can't be bundled. So like a lot of times architects will send the bundled plans to the customers and they don't really know what to do with it if they're the ones submitting it. But ours need to be separated out, each plan as an individual PDF. And then we also have our own naming standards, which you can find online. Residential and commercial, they all have their own naming standards. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There's no such thing as a bad question. Being here 6 years, I'm still constantly learning. Our job is constantly changing. I swear no submittal is the same. There's always ifs, ands, and buts to something. Let's see, for commercial projects, we keep our plans. For residential, we were only keeping them for up to 2 years. And just recently, I actually had a customer call me and their house burnt down pretty far to the ground and they needed a set of plans, but unfortunately, because we weren't electronic in 2006 when the house was built, we don't have that documentation. So the city does not have house plans. We are electronic now, so we'll be able to retain that. And so we should have them moving forward, but just something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Kara. Can I interject here? We have a question.
Yes.
This is a great recap. Paul?
Yeah, the question asker guy. So you work for the city of Eugene, Kara, am I correct? I didn't catch the introduction or whatever. You're talking about checking with the jurisdiction and I'm just making clear, you're talking about other institutions, like if I were to go to Springfield or go to the county or whatever. I know that those rules and regulations could be different, but pretty much for the city of Eugene, the rules are the rules. There aren't parts of the city that are different than other parts. Am I correct in that?
Correct. I mean, there's different zoning that can change and make it different in different parts of the city, but yeah.
Okay.
That's a great question. Thank you. Kara, if somebody is new to the permitting process and they want to find out more information about PCs or what we call project consultations, what is the best place for them to go? The phone number, or would you direct them to the website? Because I can throw up a link here if that's helpful.
Yeah, I would definitely direct them to the website. And if you still have any more questions out there, reach out to the intake team, and the phone number is 541-682-5505. We also have an email box, which is I prefer, because if you email me, I can send you a bunch of great links and forms and stuff that have great information. And that's permitinfo@ci.eugene.or.us.
Say that again, please.
permitinfo@ci.eugene.or.us.
Thank you.
Yeah, whatever people call, instead of trying to fumble through and have them do it while we're over the phone, I'll try to send them step-by-step instructions through an email with some links and whatever kind of forms that they need to kind of help them through.
Thank you, Kara. Very helpful. Everyone in the meeting, that information is posted to the chat. And before we turn the floor over to Deanna from Public Works, Paul, I'm loving your questions today.
Well, we were down there. I took a class down there a couple years ago for a tour, and it's a little shocking to realize that I can't walk in there with a, well, first of all, I probably can't walk in there at all unless somebody knows I'm coming, but with a rolled up paper set of plans. This is sort of relatively new and probably kind of liberating for you folks, because you don't have to deal with all the paper. And I was also shocked to learn when we did that tour that you don't keep, I mean, you would keep building construction documents for a year and then get them back to the owner. I figured there was this big vault or building that contained all of these old plans. The only reason I mentioned that is sometimes it's handy to refer to old plans for like a site plan. I mean, somebody's done all the work. You don't have to do all that work, but the availability of that isn't necessarily there. But the electronic copies, your ability to keep that stuff for a longer period of time is, I don't know if you're working on that or have a, send it up to the cloud or whatever that thing is, but I don't know, it's just different. People don't realize, I think in Springfield, you could probably still walk in with a paper set of plans, but you can't, you guys are forward thinking and on the cutting edge.
It definitely brings a different layer of problems, though. They thought that we wouldn't probably need, I think, as many people on our team once we went electronic, but it's almost put a little bit even more work because trying to help people through the electronic system. But I think in the long run, it's going to be, like fantastic, because we'll be able to retain those plans. I mean, we just didn't have the capacity to be able to hold on to everybody's plans for them.
Thank you, Kara. And that reminds me, currently, the atrium is closed to the public. But since the city of Eugene was already doing electronic plans since about 2018, we've been able to maintain our services throughout the pandemic. At some point in the new year, they will likely open the atrium building to the public again. So you can just keep checking our website. But great questions. And thank you, Kara. Go ahead.
One more plug that I have to get in for my team.
Yes.
Currently, we are hiring somebody. So if you are interested, go to the City of Eugene website and look at the job postings. And you can also, if you are interested in the job for the City of Eugene, there's a way to follow that and get updates. So thank you, guys.
Oh, go ahead, Paul.
One more thing before we go from you. What's your background and where did you come from to get this position?
Well,
that would be helpful to know.
That's interesting. So I don't have a whole lot. I worked in HR for about 3 years, and then I left that and went to school for healthcare administration. I don't think healthcare was really actually something I wanted to get into, but I like the administration part. I went and signed up with Quantum Recruiters. They are a temp agency that helps hire temps for the City of Eugene, and I got a call because of my application, and I actually started as a temp, just helping out the team, and just through hard work and showing them what I got, I applied for the job and got it.
Thank you,
That's
Kara.
helpful to hear. I'm sorry. That's helpful to hear because people think you need this background of X, Y, and Z perhaps to do what you do. And the fact is, you can, if you're sharp enough, you can pick a lot of it up along the way. Apparently you
Yeah,
have, so.
background helps, but yeah, definitely. It's a great company. I love working for the city.
That's awesome. Oh, Margaret, I see your hand is up.
I just wanted to mention that Ryan has a question in the chat, probably for Dal.
Oh, thank you. So this question, I can read it for everybody. From Ryan, it says, is there any information you could implement to the contractor during testing for their license with CCB for keeping rivers clean?
Sorry, let me just think about that. Well, I think if you're looking for resources around construction site management and erosion prevention methods and techniques, there are a number of different manuals that are available that are helpful for contractors. The city of Eugene does not have an erosion control manual, but the Oregon DEQ does. If you go Oregon DEQ erosion control manual, they have a very good technical manual that is available for review for anyone. Also Clean Water Services, which is an agency down in the Portland area that also has a very good resource manual, and the city of Portland has a very good erosion and construction site management BMP manual. So that would be what I'd recommend you kind of review or look at for that test.
Thank you. I'll throw a link up there. And again, thanks, Kara, for sharing your experience. And in the chat, there's a link to jobs with the city that you can sign up for. I'd love to chat more about the open jobs, but I do also want to make sure we have time. Deanna, are you ready for us?
Hi, yeah.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Deanna Smith, and I work for the city of Eugene in the Public Works Engineering Division, and we're on loan over at Building Permit Services. So I just wanted to say hi to Paul. I took his blueprint reading class just before COVID. So it was good to see you. He's a great teacher. So Public Works is a big division and we cover a lot of infrastructure. So our role during the building permit review is to oversee the marriage of private development and public infrastructure. So public infrastructure includes the street system, and that is broken down into different parts, but sidewalk is part of that. Protecting street trees is part of that. Repairing curbs or installing drainage holes into curbs is part of that. And permitting driveways or what we call access connections. So the access connection is the part in the public way and it connects to the driveway on private property. We also look at wastewater. So we're looking out for the regional wastewater system out at on Division, and also the local wastewater system, which is pipes underground. So all the gray water that gets flushed goes out to the treatment system, and we're looking after the pipe system and making sure that every development site has a connection to that public system. We're also looking out for our stormwater system, so the city's public stormwater system. Sometimes that includes open drainage ways, but most of the time it's piped systems. And we are particularly interested in two objectives. One is flood control, and one is water quality. So there are standards that need to be met regarding each of those objectives. And I can go into a little detail about that in a moment. We also look out for the parks systems, and part of that is street trees on the street. We do charge systems development charges, which helps enhance capacity for these systems. And so each development pays for their proportionate portion of these fees. And it's a one-time fee that gets paid with the development permit. It is separate from review fees. And the systems development charges is based on use. And there is a methodology that has determined how each use that is proposed on a development site, how that impacts the system, and then what are the charges going to be. So it's a very complicated system, and we encourage you to call us and talk about it if you have any questions. When we look at a set of plans, we are looking just outside of the property lines. We do look at some things on private property, but our focus is the public infrastructure, which is outside the property lines. It is important to ensure that you know where your property lines are. And sometimes that requires a private surveyor. We don't have that service because property lines don't always follow fence lines. And so we can help you find those sometimes just by providing information that we might have access to. But it ultimately is the applicant's responsibility to do that part. We look at public utility easements. So a utility easement is an area on private property that's reserved for public utilities to go through that private property. And it's usually depicted on a plan, but it could be described in a with boundaries in a description that usually a surveyor provides. And so that is set aside and should not be obstructed. So we don't allow any encroachments into public utility easements. And that's important to know because even a roof overhang or a footing of a building, we will put the plans on wait until that discrepancy or conflict gets resolved. One way to resolve it is to record a revocable permit, and a revocable permit is revocable, which means it could be removed at any time if we feel that we need that area back. But a revocable is essentially a long-term temporary permit that allows private encroachments into these public areas. Access connections. So we look carefully at where driveway locations are on private property, and on high classification streets, if there's a lot of traffic on that street and that has been predetermined and is documented as to which streets are what classification. But on high classification streets, we have more restrictive rules because we want fewer points of conflict. And a point of conflict is a vehicle entering or exiting a development site onto the public system. And so we have to look at that carefully before it gets permitted. And sometimes that can really change the plans. You know, if you have a garage or an entrance to a building in a certain location, and you have your circulation already set up, if we say, no, you can't have a driveway there, that can really throw things off. So it's important to get that ironed out ahead of time. Let's see, what else did I want to mention? How much time do I have, Garion?
Well, we are running a little bit short on time
Okay.
just due to the earlier part. I'm really appreciative of what you're sharing, Deanna. And from what I'm hearing, you would recommend applicants or people with questions to reach out to Public Works before they submit for permit for things 100%. Like stormwater. And can you remind us of a good phone number or email contact? And I'll throw it up in the chat here.
Sounds good. Yes, we really welcome your questions, and we encourage you to do that before you submit for building permits. So that is Public Works is at 541-682-8400. And you can also send emails to publicworks.ci.eugene.or.us. I just wanted to give a couple of tips really quickly. Oftentimes a land use application has been decided previously. So my tip is to read the land use decision documents. A lot of times things are spelled out there as to what is expected to be shown, or solutions to problems have already kind of been ironed out to demonstrate feasibility of development. So reading the decision document is a good idea. And also recognize that stormwater standards, when you're addressing them, it can take time for us to review them. There are so many different options and solutions that it takes time to determine what your site is up against. And it really is a case by case. Every site has its own particulars. So just because a different property was asked to do something doesn't necessarily mean that's going to apply in all cases. So every site has its own issues that need to be looked at.
Excellent. Thank you, Deanna. Are there any questions for Deanna before we hear from Kelly in land use? Okay, I'm going to keep moving. If you do have questions for Public Works, just like Deanna mentioned, the contact info is up in the chat, and it sounds like it's important to keep in mind that each site is unique, and it is a good idea to reach out to Public Works before you want to come in for permit. Kelly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Whitmill. I'm on the land use team. I'm a land use analyst. I'm also referred to as a planner. Planning is separated in Eugene into a planning department, and then there are planners within the building permit department that do some review as well. So we're within the building permit services division and review plans for compliance with Chapter 9, the land use code. So we also help people navigate the regulations and processes which are associated with that. My team is a 4-person team. Myself and Mike are both land use analysts, and we have Matt and Reed who typically help the public directly with answering questions related to the land use code. So for me, I just want to kind of review how I would look at it if I was someone getting into this business and thinking of either you're going to be doing contracting, or you're going to be working for an architect, or you're going to be opening a design business. The important thing with land use is to start with the zoning of the property. So you would start by determining the base zone, and that could be something like industrial or commercial or residential. That will help you determine the base standards, what the uses are that are allowed on the property, and then what the development standards are that apply, such as setbacks and height and landscaping requirements. There could also be overlay zones on the property. For instance, there's site review overlay, which would determine whether you have to go through a planning application before pursuing or before requesting development permits, or whether maybe there's an existing site review. Deanna mentioned this earlier. She said, look at the land use application. So if a property has gone through an approval process, like a PUD or a site review, or even a partition, there's usually a document associated that provides a site plan and an agreement that show what was required for that particular site. It's not going to be on every site in Eugene, but there are some that will apply. So keep that in mind. So check the zoning, check for overlay zones. The overlay zones will add an extra set of regulations. For instance, if there's a resource nearby, a water resource, it will tell you how close you can be, or how close you can develop, or how far away you have to be to develop what you're proposing. and then look at the land use application. The pro tip, I'm just going to keep it short because there's a lot, I could go on and on about land use. The pro tip I have is do not make assumptions. Always check the zoning, check to see, because a lot of people make assumptions that if there's an existing structure that's like 2 feet from a property line, well, I can add on to that structure. I can build another structure that's 2 feet from the property line, but it could be that that was allowed at some point and the code has changed and it's no longer allowed. Also, as Deanna mentioned, don't make assumptions about property line locations. That happens a lot. In our case, it's up to the property owners to verify where their property lines are. We can give you tools to help you determine where the property lines might be. And if you can't determine, given the information we provide, then you need to typically hire a surveyor. But it's really important that you verify that as well. We do have a great team that's available by phone and email. So our phone number is 541-682, and all of a sudden 8336. They cover both land use and planning questions. I've kind of focused more on just the land use like development today, but they answer all applicable questions to the land use code. Then the email is landuse.eugene.or.us. And I would like to share, I started at the city 20 years ago with a high school education. I started as a permit tech, and as Kara said, you can be trained to do the job. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity then to move into being a land use specialist, which then prepared me for my current job as a land use analyst. So for everyone out there, just keep that in mind. I'm not sure what your career goals are, but there are opportunities. So
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Kelly, for sharing your path. Are there any land use questions before we hear from Joel, our residential plans examiner? Yes, Paul?
I hate one more quick question.
Yeah.
So I like to think that if I need to do some research, I mean, if you want to buy a piece of property in Eugene somewhere, doing your due diligence, we were talking about that the other day. Can a layperson get on this website and navigate? And I might be able to determine what the zoning is, but is there something that breaks that down and tells me what I know what a RR5 is out in the county, I know what that means, or zoning and setbacks. Is it relatively user-friendly?
well, yeah, there are tools, and I could link to the tools that help you look up zoning, and I can link to the land use code. The land use code is a very thick document, and yes, the starting point is you determine your zone, and then you go in the code to that particular chapter and section that tells you the standards applicable. There are, though, some other additional caveats that sometimes are not, or could be challenging. That's why I always recommend to just give a call and verify assumptions. Always start with your own, always start with your own legwork and your own research and go, this is what I think, and then just confirm that with staff to make sure you're on the right track. Sometimes you're not going to know whether there's an associated land use application. There could be an overlay zone that indicates, like a site review overlay or a PUD or PD overlay that indicates there's a land use application, but it's not going to always be clear that there's an approved land use application. So that is important to verify those things.
Thank you, Kelly. Great question, Paul. And the contact info for land use that Kelly shared is in the chat. Deanna, you have a question or your hand is up?
Yes, Paul's question prompted me to give out our website. It's called Euge Maps, EUGMAPS, and that program has a lot of information available to show the zoning, the infrastructure that's around, and it gives a lot of information. You might check it out. It's kind of fun to play around with. You can find out a lot of information just going on there. It's kind of recently been put out there. Maybe it's like 2 years new.
Thank you, Deanna. I'll throw up a link to that while we hear from Joel, residential.
Right here, bald guy with the mask. So I work in the residential plans examiner team. There's 3 of us. And before I go any further, I wanted to reiterate what Kelly said about assumptions. Don't assume. The best thing you can do is communicate. If you're wondering about something, call us and ask us, because we're here to help. Anyway, so what our team does is not only do we review the plans for code compliance. By the way, we're under the 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code that came into effect in October. But we also coordinate with Public Works, land use, erosion, work really close with them, as well as intake. We assign the permits. Besides the building permit, there are plumbing, electrical, and mechanical. We assign the fees. We bring in the documents that you might provide for us for review, and we coordinate that whole permit along with reviewing for residential code compliance. And like it's been mentioned before, it's all done electronically. It's important that you follow the instructions for submitting, for instance, file naming, things like that. Because if you don't, then it kind of plugs up the system a little bit. It's an easy thing to do. If you have problems with that, there again, you can call us. You can submit all of the documents at one time when you're going through that process. You don't need to do it one at a time, which is a really neat thing. It is required that the documents are clear. In other words, your intent with your drawings shows exactly what you're going to do. And I always kind of relay to the customer that if I can't build this by looking at your drawings, it's probably not going to make it. So you're required to have your footing, foundation, the details, framing details, brace walls, all of that. There's a prescriptive code path with the 2021 code book, very specific. Most people are able to follow that. If you can't follow that, then there is a requirement that you have engineering. I've noticed, I've only been here, I'm going on my 4th year, but I've noticed just in that short time that a lot more people are leaning on engineers just to be done with it. Brace wall panels, beam spans, headers, things like that, which expedites the process, although it does add an extra expense. There usually can't be too much information. In some cases there are, but if you're in doubt about the information that you're providing us, put it on there. You know, if we don't need it, we won't use it. We don't review for electrical. We don't review for plumbing. Those are licensed crafts and they're reviewed in the field. But you can provide that with your plan set. There might be useful information on there, but just understand we don't review that right now. There is language in the code book that provides for no permit required. That's in R105.2. That's changed a little bit since the last code cycle, so you might look at that. We look at shrink swell potential, landslide, soil, all the soil aspects. We look at that too. Sometimes there's a requirement for a geotechnical or a geotech engineer to analyze the soils for footings and foundations. So we look at all of the structural part on my team. But then again, like I said, we administer permit, coordinate the permit, and work really close with Public Works and land use. And I can't think of anything else that you need to know for the sake of time.
Well, I'd love to open it up. Thank you, Joel, for any residential code questions, either from a drafting perspective or who to call. Any questions out there for residential? Yes, Paul?
Yeah, so are you, there are changes afoot with the zoning and what is going to be allowed. I'm sure, I don't know if you guys are approaching that with dread or not, but just the ability to, with the ADUs that's going on. Is there much of a relaxing of building code with the ADUs? I mean, I saw in the paper, there's a couple plans for little small ADU buildings that have already been checked out, approved. If you wanted to adopt those plans, you could just pretty much tell them where you're going to put it.
Kelly can speak to some of that, Paul, but yeah, we do have one set of plans that are pre-approved. We're working with architects, local architects. I noticed that one came in today. What we hope to have is several pre-approved plans available. As far as the relaxed rules and everything, Kelly, I can defer to you because you probably know more about that than I do.
Yes, from a building code perspective, it's a dwelling, and then from a land use perspective, we do have some middle housing changes. There's expected to go into effect next year. I just want to be clear, because that's another thing that a lot of people make assumptions that even like, let's say it's determined that you can have more than one dwelling on your property, and it's very important that if there's an existing structure on your property, it doesn't mean you can just throw a kitchen in, a bathroom, and then or even just start using it as a second dwelling. It's important to know that it needs to be converted through a building permit process to comply with the state building codes as well as the land use codes, and there's associated fees that will be assessed as well. So that's just something important that I wanted to make sure is clear. We do have the changes that are going to be implemented. There's a website, and I can track that down and link it in the chat as well.
Yeah,
Did I answer your question, Paul?
Structurally, there's no relaxed rules. It still has to meet code, but land use has
Right.
some.
Right. We've got a project in Springfield that the construction class is working on. We're building basically a duplex. It's a house with an attached ADU, and there are ultimate plans for another duplex on that piece of property as soon as this, the assumption is being made that this will come to fruition, these new rules, but we'll see. I mean, it's just a very interesting, controversial topic, depending on who you talk to. And it's
Yes,
just, I don't know,
it's
just a
definitely
lot of
interesting.
change.
It's a lot. It's going to be a lot of change, and it is controversial, but it's mandated by the state, and then Eugene is coming up with their own sets, and there's a model code that we have to adopt if we don't adopt our own code, and we're working on adopting our own code at this point.
Thank you. Great questions. And Joel, could you, when we're talking about kind of position, like our work here at the city, can you talk a little bit about your background and your path to being a residential plans examiner?
Oh boy. So I spent 35 years in the construction industry. I was an HVAC specialty sheet metal designer. I retired out of that trade and spent a lot of time crawling houses, putting in heat systems all the way up to the Marcus Mariota Center, specialty sheet metal in restaurants and designing that type of stuff. And I decided to retire, and I went and took my building inspector classes and got all my certs, and I ended up here. And it's been a great second career.
Yeah, that's not retiring.
I retired for a year and a half.
Where did
Anyway,
you get all of your certs at? Were they here in Eugene, or?
I did it through Salem, through the Oregon State building codes. I did the plumbing, electrical, mechanical, plans examiner, building, that whole thing. It took me about 1.5 years to get it all done.
Did you go through Chemeketa, Joel?
I did not.
Okay.
I did it on the side. I was still working actually for a local contractor. But yeah, I just did it on my own.
That's just another plug for jobs in Eugene, inspectors, so Joel got some certification to be inspector too, but then he can do plan review, correct, Joel? But
That's correct.
inspectors, in the field inspectors who inspect the work, that's also a career that's would be a good career for people.
And that's a good point too. And I want to add that we work pretty closely with the field inspectors. I look at it like we're trying to help the field inspector do his job. So we're trying to pre-inspect everything on our desk and make it smoother for that person in the field. So sometimes you'll hear us say, well, I need to know what this is. What's that beam? What are you supporting that beam with? If it's not on the drawings, that inspector is not going to know what he's looking at. So we work pretty close with them and try to help them expedite their field inspections.
Thank you. Well, Zoom is letting us continue to Zoom. I'm gonna, unless there's any more residential questions. Okay. And I just wanted to also point out, like, a lot of you are, meeting us here at the city for the first time. And I hope you can even see just in the way that we talk to each other and we support each other. It's whatever role people have. I think we end up staying here because of the team. We get an opportunity to learn, we get an opportunity to test ourselves. And ultimately it's about community service. So all of us are super thrilled that each of you are here today. And like everyone has said, there are jobs here right now. It's a great place to be, excellent benefits, which you can see on our website. There's support. Sarah Maderi, who is our current city manager, I believe she started out maybe doing maintenance in the parks. So the city really does value a variety of experience. I know for me, at least, it can be intimidating to go after a new job when you look at the job posting like we've thrown up here in the chat and think, oh, I don't have all these things that they're listing, but I have a couple of them. And so I would offer, having been in, shoes like yours, where we're thinking about our career path, the idea of informational interviewing. And so instead of looking at what you don't have, you can look at what you do have. And even just by joining this meeting today, you already have the contacts of 6 people here at the city. So if there are jobs, you're like, hey, I saw this job, and either it may be on one of our teams, like Kara's team or our building inspector's team, or we can put you in touch and make that introduction. So after the meeting, like we usually do, I'll send a recording of this video to Professor Robertson with my contact info. So if anybody out there is interested in an informational interview, which is basically just something informal you set up on your own. For me, my informational interviews have just been meeting someone for 5 or 10 minutes with a couple of questions and just kind of learning more about the roles. I'm seeing some heads shaking in positive ways, so that's good, but I wanted to throw that out there. Okay, so I'm going to go over briefly commercial. So my name is Garian. As a commercial plans examiner, there are currently 4 of us. And we, after our intake team looks at the permit and makes sure that it is complete submittal, the commercial permit team takes it and we route it to our other reviewers. So for example, it goes to Deanna's team, it goes to Kelly's team. If there's erosion, it'll go to Dal's team. And the residentials, they do their same thing, but just for resi. So commercial is everything from tenant infills, like when we see a strip mall changing from a nail salon to a pizza shop, to the bigger buildings on the university, like the big apartment buildings. Those are actually technically commercial buildings. What I could offer is that, like everyone else is saying here, if you have a question, don't hesitate to reach out. Our job is public servants, and you are the folks that are going to be submitting for permit, hopefully, coming up through here. So you're the ones we want to work with, and that's what I like best about working for the city of Eugene. Previously, I lived and worked in Philadelphia back east, just very different environment. I think we're much more community oriented here. And let's see, pro tips. We've talked about communication. We are you. We see you at the grocery store. We see you at the shops. You know, we are symbiotic with you. Paul?
I just wanted to echo the fact that I don't know. There's just been I've been around long enough that, you know, it used to be that the building department was the enemy, and I'm sure there are people that still feel that way. But I think there's a realization that you want people to, first of all, you want people to do things properly in the way they should. But if you're too difficult to deal with, you have somebody across the river that they can just go over there. And I mean, sometimes Springfield can be easier to work with than Eugene, but you are there to help us out. And it really is, I don't know how long, the last 10 years or something, but it's just been this change in atmosphere, and it is noticeable. I mean, it's a friendly place, and you want the stuff to, and you help builders get it done, and other people get things done and find out answers. And it's just nice. I wanted you to hear that from somebody outside the realm there.
Oh, that means a lot to us. Thank you. Thank you. And we appreciate like Professor Robertson reaching out to us, like pandemic or no pandemic, we're making it work. And thank you, Paul. Recently, personally, I had the privilege to go over and meet the folks at Springfield Building Department, and I echo what you're saying. They're great to work with. And so I think moving forward, you know, there are connections. I don't know about you all, but the past year and a half or 2 years has really showed me like what connections I want to make. And I think, you know, Lane County, we have Lane County, you know, they're a planning department. We have Springfield, you know, a bunch of different jurisdictions. To be clear, the city of Eugene is its own jurisdiction. So like Kelly mentioned, and some others, different rules. But moving forward, I think that's something we want to do together. Ryan?
Are you staffed enough to where you were sending inspectors out of town to help areas that are lacking inspectors?
Oh, that's a great question. Currently, there's not any intergovernmental agreements to do that. I don't know if there's any other city staff here that had a thought about that, but currently my understanding is no.
Oops, okay. Can you hear me? I think, so like Kirk Sundahl, he used to do some inspections for like Lane County, and he'd go out to Florence, but I think it was more of he was working for them and us kind of situation, as opposed to us sending inspectors out.
I've used fill-in inspectors in Bend for the city of Bend over the years that have been from Eugene. That's the only reason why I asked if you're still doing it. That's kind of confusing.
Well, thank you, Kara, for clarifying about our inspector in the past. Yes, currently, we do not have an intergovernmental agreement to lend out inspectors. I think the way, if you are curious, would be to reach out directly to our inspection team. The inspection supervisor may be able to provide some clarification on that, but currently no. We actually are hiring building inspectors as well, so I don't anticipate that changing. Margaret, your hand is up.
And I'm just pointing that Tamara has a question in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I'm going to read it out loud. For my work, for Garion, did you need to do the residential structural inspector and plans examiner state course? So no, as a commercial plans examiner, I am certified in building code review, fire plan review, and mechanical review. We do have commercial plans examiners that are cross-certified because they have had previous roles as residential plans examiners. Great question, thank you. Okay, it is 11:10. Zoom apparently has forgotten to shut us off. I just wanted to open up the floor if there was questions that came up or anything you were hoping to hear about and haven't heard about yet. Yes, Paul? Yeah.
So Deanna, you used to be in charge of, well, assessing sites for water runoff. I don't know what you call that. Do you still do that? Or are you doing a new job or?
No, I'm doing the same job for Public Works, and we do look at stormwater runoff. We look at where does your water go after the gutter collects it and sends it through the downspouts. We want it to go to an approved point of destination, which could be a private system, a public system, or you may be able to retain it on site depending on site conditions like soil types and amount of area that it would require to contain that. Yeah, I'm doing the same thing.
It's just kind of an interesting job actually, and it is one that has changed recently. I mean, we've changed the way we deal with runoff water. What is runoff water? Well, it's stuff that, you know, what comes off the roof is usually allowed to run to the street. If we pave a whole bunch of parking areas, that is water we need to take care of some other way. And these are all the swales that you see that people are building. And I don't know. Yeah. It's just a hurdle to developing property. And it's just something relatively new. And it's just something for people to be aware of.
Yeah.
And the other point I would make is, you know, we're talking about how you can access property and how that could affect the building design. Well, I would suggest that maybe if you're consider that to be a potential challenge, that would be step number 1 or 2, figure out where you're going to be able to get on the property and then design the building. I mean, yeah, you check it out before you submit plans. Could be way too late, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, stormwater is complex. We do have a manual online, the Stormwater Management Manual, and it's a good resource. And I encourage everyone to go look at it when you're first thinking about developing a property, because it'll help you address the standards that meet the objectives that the state has mandated and we then are carrying out. So we want to help you through that process. You have a lot of forks in the road to choose which way to go, and we can tell you the consequences of each of those choices.
Thank you, Deanna. So it sounds like reaching out early to Public Works will help our applicants and community make informed decisions about their projects. It's a great question, Paul. Professor Robertson?
Margaret is fine.
Okay.
So some of us here are drafters, and there are some tasks that drafters are legally allowed to perform when they are not licensed architects, and then others we are not allowed to perform. If we have not looked all this up in the statutes, do you help us think about which drawings we're allowed to make and which we're not allowed to make, or is that our responsibility?
I can speak to that from a commercial standpoint. So the state of Oregon requires a licensed design professional. So that means a stamping architect or engineer to prepare the construction documents for buildings that are considered non-exempt. And the state defines non-exempt as a building that is either greater than 4,000 square feet or greater than 20 feet in height from the lowest interior floor finish to the highest interior ceiling finish. So that means if you have a basement, it's from the basement floor to, if you have a finished attic, to the lid of the attic space. Residential does not require a stamp for an architect. That's different if there are some engineering, like Joel was saying. If we're not prescriptive, then engineering is required. Is that right, Joel?
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. Yeah, that's correct. We do look for the engineering stamp if there's engineering documents, the architect not so much, but we are not allowed to design or go down the road of suggested design.
Mm-hmm. So for residential, Joel, how often would you say is the majority of the plans that you see drafters, contractors not stamped by an architect?
I would say probably the majority of them. I don't know, Kara. You see them too. I would say there's probably a majority of them that aren't stamped by the architect. I mean, we allow 8.5 by 11 freehand drawings as long as they're to scale and we can read them. So.
Yeah, you get a lot less of them on residential, definitely.
Right.
I think we cannot do driveway design without a license. We can
Yeah,
do the building, but not the driveway.
I can't speak to that. Deanna, do you know?
Most, you don't need a permit to do flat work anyway, so.
Right. A lot of
Yeah.
flat work you don't need a permit for, but the approach in the public right of way, we will give a standard drawing that we want it constructed to depending on the sidewalk configuration. So, and those are designed by engineers, you know, adopted. We adopt ODOTs and modify them with our own modifications, but we don't require an engineer or any type of professional designer to submit an application for an access connection, but contractors must be licensed and bonded to do the work in the public right of way.
Thank you. And I wanted to just kind of add on a little bit from a commercial standpoint when I was talking about exempt versus non-exempt. Say we have a tenant space in an existing strip mall and the strip mall is over 4,000 square feet. And we're changing, I think before my example was nail salon to pizza shop. That would be considered in an existing building. That would be considered space planning, which would not require a stamp, which is something that could be prepared by a drafter. You know, the permits are going to be way more efficient. Oh, thank you, Kelly. Kelly needs to sign out. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye, Kel. So space planning, that is something we see all the time in commercial. You know, tenants come in and out in an existing building. That's probably the majority of commercial permits that we see, which is great work for people with drafting experience. If you have either you'd be working with somebody that has familiarity of local codes or educating yourself, that's the way to the most efficient permit process.
Yeah, I'll interject again. I tag on to the, it's just enlightening to find out that you don't really need to be an architect to draw house plans. I mean, we have a codes class and we cover a lot of this prescriptive stuff that, you know, Joel was talking about. You know, it's all in there. It's when you go outside those parameters, you need to get an engineer to figure out the weird stuff and have them put their stamp on it and away you go. You know, I've done it and a lot of people do, you know.
Surprisingly, we do. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I think
I'm done.
Paul, most of the time what I see is if there's an issue with it, what they've done is they've got the wall, they've drawn the wall out, and they get blinders on, and they think, okay, well, I understand this wall. Everybody else should understand it, and they forget that we don't have a clue. When we're looking at it, there's no perspective as far as where it's going, or and if they don't put dimensions on there or tell us what the header design is or anything like that, we're left in the dark. They understand it, but we don't understand it. If I can't build it from your drawing, it's not going anywhere.
I was going to mention that surprisingly, Public Works does require a lot of design professionals to stamp plans. Stormwater facilities do need to be designed by an engineer if they are going to contain the flood control design storm. So retaining all of the stormwater on site, because we want to ensure that flooding is minimized, and they need to have experience and education in soils in order to determine how large of a facility will be necessary. And Public Works also expects stamped engineering design for ADA ramps. So if you're building at a corner lot, then and there's no sidewalk, or the ADA is out of compliance, then you'll be required to submit an engineered design for that ramp, and it'll have to be specific to that corner. We're working on getting some standards adopted, but at this point in time, I think we're not there quite yet.
Thank you, Deanna. And we're talking about ADA ramps in the public right of way, right? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Ryan, is your hand up, or you're just, no? Okay. I can only see about like 24 of you. And so, yeah, some of the ways has been helpful to me to think about the design professional. It's also, whenever a plan is stamped, that design professional is not only assuming the knowledge, but also the responsibility. So legally, that designer, for architects, they own those drawings until they die. And oftentimes, a property owner will think, oh, my architect drew these plans and gave them to me in their mind. They're really intellectual property, anything that's stamped. So they really don't actually belong to the person who paid for the service. Like a property owner couldn't modify an architect's plans. But again, it's the background when the state of Oregon says a stamp is required, or like Deanna is saying with Public Works, it's taking into account not only sort of those additional levels of knowledge and training, but also the responsibility for the project. Okay, well, we have covered a lot of ground. Margaret, we're at 11:23. What do you think? Any more questions, or should we wrap it up? Anything else?
Well, what do you all think? Who has another question that you haven't brought up yet? And I'll leave it to Gary and to watch for hand raises. And if not, I want to thank.
Thanks, Ryan.
Oh, you got one.
Save the day.
So when something is set back for revision, do you have like an in-house drafter that takes care of revisions that have to be changed, or how does it go back to the engineer?
Joel, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. We don't have in-house draftsmen. When we send it back, it's up to you to get with your design professional and have the changes incorporated into the drawing and resubmit the drawing with those changes on it.
Thank you. And per the state of Oregon, our jurisdiction follows the rules that all the other jurisdictions are required to follow. Anytime, like Joel is saying, if there's a revision, it's all based in the written published building codes. So that code section is cited after each comment. So the person preparing the plans can be like, oh yeah, this is the code section. This is the intent behind it. This is the information we're looking for.
You remember I mentioned excuse me, I
Go
just
ahead.
happened to think, remember I mentioned about file names, naming standards that we have. Whenever you resubmit a drawing, you need to use that same exact file format. And that includes punctuation, whatever you have going on there, and make sure the orientation of the drawing is correct. Because what that does is once you make your changes, it slides in under the comments that we've made. And it's also important to note the changes that you've made. A lot of times people will have an approved permit. They'll get into the production phase or the construction phase. They'll see that there might be a problem. They'll change their drawings. They'll send them back to us as a post approved drawing. And if you don't have a cloud or a note saying, hey, we're making this change, we're staring at a piece of paper and we don't know what those changes are. So all that information is important. File naming standards, orientation, and then note the changes that you've made.
Thank you, Joel. That's excellent advice. And I want to echo what Kara posted in the chat about continuing to learn things, and that being the best part of this job. So I think that would perhaps be, one of the best ways to close this meeting, that for some of you, that may want to reach out for informational interview opportunity connections, check out our job listings. This may be just the start of the dialogue and the start of your next career path. And I wanted to say a sincere thank you to you, Margaret and Paul. Margaret, for setting this up every year. It's wonderful. Paul, great questions, helping us move forward. And the students, oh, yes?
I just want to say to everyone, so Garion is telling us that they are here to help and that you are welcome here. And the fact that Garion and all your team have spent an hour and a half out of your day, when I know you are super, super busy, and you are acting like you have nothing better to do than to spend time with us. And I just think that is a real mark of how much you care about your outreach to the community. So thank you, truly.
Oh, thank you, Margaret. That means a lot to us. And yes, I'm so thrilled our city staff that was able to join us today. Dal from Erosion, Kara from Intake, Deanna from Public Works, Kelly from Land Use, Joel from Residential, and I'm Commercial. And as I said, Margaret, I'll be sending the video out to you to forward as
Wonderful.
you wish.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And let's end it on that. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.